Welcome back to Minority Report. I'm your host, Salomón FlamencoOur, and today's show, we have Melanie and Sheila Cruz-Morales, two recent first-generation Georgetown graduates. They are also the founders and directors of College Access for Non-Citizens, an organization which helps first-generation students gain access to higher education. Welcome to the show.
Yay! Oh my
God,
God,
thank
this is so
you.
exciting. Thank you so much for having us. We're
Yes.
so excited to be here today and to have an open dialogue on really important topics that are happening around the world.
Yes. So, how are we going to distinguish ourselves? I'm Melanie, and
I'm Sheila.
nice. Well, thank you so much for having us.
Of course, thank you for coming on. I guess for some context to the listeners, we talked a couple weeks ago about having you guys come on, and we had like an outline of what to talk about. And then a week ago, a judge in the Southern District of Texas, Andrew Hannon, ruled that DACA once again was illegal. And this is something I'm going to ask you guys about to really parse out the details. The status of DACA holders has not changed. Is that correct?
Yes. So, Melanie and I both were aware that this decision was going to come out since like the beginning of summer. We've been waiting for this decision,
Yeah.
and we also were aware that this was the decision that was going to happen. So currently, right now, Andrew Hannon ruled DACA as unlawful. Once again, there aren't any immediate changes to the program. So if you can renew, you can still renew, but you can't apply if you haven't applied before. So there's still some restrictions on the program.
Yeah. Again, one of the biggest components that has not been addressed is the fact that there will not be new applicants able to apply for DACA, which is something that has occurred since 2017, and then later on when there was a change in the program for a bit. But now again, no more applicants, so there are a lot of undocumented youth who are
Are-
being excluded out of this program, and now the program is really on the brink of dying for once and for all, genuinely, is what the consensus is being talked about in the community. And it will be the second time that the DACA case goes back to the Supreme Court. So that's where we're at again.
And now, I feel like this is really important to talk about because I've been off the air for a couple months and a lot has happened in those couple months. What we just talked about, DACA being ruled unlawful and the affirmative action case that happened earlier this summer. And so this does seem like a very precarious moment for ethnic minorities in the US and especially undocumented communities in the US. How are you guys feeling about this? I mean, what have you guys felt about this current ruling, and do you see any path forward that can rectify some of these?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question because I have an immediate answer that comes up to my mind. And I think processing this past summer with the end of race-based affirmative action, and again with just another judicial court release on the DACA decision, is that this country is getting louder and louder and louder by the ruling of white supremacy over and over and over again. And I think that that's something that is being left out in the conversation, because what I see when I see these rulings, when I see this impact that's going to affect BIPOC students and undocumented students, it's all white supremacist, like white supremacy happening in clear direct action. And I think that's the most scariest part of it all,
Yeah.
because it's getting louder and louder, with whether it's the judicial branch, that if you are an ethnic minority in this country, you really don't matter to them in the eyes of the law. And that's what I get every single time I see a breaking news and I see an update on the DACA decision or anything that will affect me in my communities.
Yeah. I think that since the beginning of the summer, when affirmative action was taken away, it was really, really painful because it's very loud and clear to me and Melanie of who they are attacking. And they're attacking students of color, they're attacking people of color, they're attacking undocumented people. And like we've seen, Roe v. Wade was overturned over a year ago, and that is a huge fundamental human right, right? And then we see again affirmative action, race-based affirmative action being taken away as well. And you just keep seeing these rights being taken away. And when it was happening, I thought, why isn't anyone panicking the way we need to be panicking? And I don't want to instill like fear and so on onto people, but it's just we need to understand what we're seeing in front of our eyes. Because immediately when that case happened, I started thinking about Brown versus Board. Like, we think of Brown versus Board as like it's a landmark case, and sometimes people think that it's untouchable. But the reality is, we've been seeing these laws being affected, and who's to say that these other laws won't also be affected? So with the news of the DACA case, it's not surprising at all, but it doesn't, nonetheless, it's still very painful.
Hmm. Hmm. I think that's on my mind. The previous 4 years under the Trump admin, right? There was a lot of bad things happening almost all the time, but I feel like one of the most insidious long-term effects was the packing of the courts. And Andrew Hannon wasn't a Trump-appointed judge; he was under W. But that's still a very real concern, especially when you look at the Supreme Court and you see a lot of these decisions, like Dobbs, like with race-based affirmative action, and it is really concerning. It's genuinely very scary, and I totally agree. I think people should be really raising the alarm bells now more than ever. I guess I'm just trying to see how can you kind of weave those together, do you think? Like
Yeah.
it is all very real what's happening. And that's why I really respect you and your work in terms of giving education access to people who need it. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. Well, first off, I just want to highlight your point about how I think Donald Trump left office, but people don't understand that that man's impact is long lasting. And I think we see it perfectly with just the courts and just the amount of violence that they have instilled in us. And I think that a lot of people were at peace to see perhaps a Democratic president in office, but it's like that's not how politics works. Those lasting effects of Donald Trump are being felt and will be felt for the foreseeable future for many people who he made his agenda on attacking. And to this day, Donald Trump is inflicting pain on the undocumented community. It was 2017 where he first tried killing DACA completely, and here we are still in a state of limbo where we don't see a pathway to citizenship at all, and we don't see any push or acknowledgement from the Biden administration on their end as well. So
Mhm.
it's very difficult,
Yeah.
but I could.
But back to your question, I think that you brought up a good point, and it's like, how do we weave these issues together? And I think that that's my point, especially as an Indigenous woman and as an Indigenous activist who carries a lot of intersectional identities. And I think that in every single movement that exists, intersectionality needs to be centered. But I think that we need to take it up a notch. And what that means is truly like weaving intersectionality in everything that we do. And I think that begins by centering the conversation of citizenship because it is left out in so many movements. It's left out in the climate movement. Like, I think that the work that we do at College Access for Non-Citizens makes me really, really proud because we tackle the issues at the root. Whenever you're in a policy class, you learn that the best types of implemented policies happen from bottom to up because there's
Mhm.
just no way that top down is going to trickle down and create the long lasting change that you want to see. So at CAN, what we do is we find, but also we have students reaching out to us for guidance, for tips, for solidarity, for advice, and for mentorship. And I'm very blessed enough to have fought really, really hard alongside my sister for a college education, an education from Georgetown University and being able to live in Washington, D.C., being able to be in conversations with public officials, being in conversations with the president and the Biden administration, all of these opportunities I've had to fight for, but, I use them as tools to also bring back everything that I learn and everything that I see to also help my community. And so what that means is that can we help students, and particularly undocumented students, students from who are Black, Indigenous, and students of color. And again, this is where you see that intersectionality is so important, because no matter what, we all have different identities that all cross one another. But back to what I'm saying about citizenship, it needs to be a focus point for everyone in every single movement. And I talk about the climate crisis, and I talk about it because it's here and we're living through it. And we can't continue to ignore undocumented people in every single aspect. So again, I really do think about the double weaving, and I think about how we need to take it up a notch in every organizing space to make sure that we're not leaving people out. There's so much that's going on in this country and in this world. But what we really need to understand is that at the end of the day, they all root from the same place.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think I think you say a lot, and I come back to this conversation that I had with Professor Olufemi Taiwo alongside Shayla one day. We were in his office hours, and we were talking about citizenship and sovereignty and borders and all these things, migration. And he is a citizen with parents of immigrants who are immigrants, and I was just confiding in our experience, and something that he said was, well, I think a lot of people just have to sit back, understand that they all have these identities as well. But I think that some way that we can create the way that we can start to initiate to create a better world is asking yourself, I understand that this is my experience. Now, what am I not experiencing, and what is not affecting me? What is ongoing out in the world that I am completely unaware of, or just don't have the knowledge and the experience because I don't face it. And if it is unjust, then why am I not caring? And I think that that was a very simple question that he posed, that we all should pose to one another. And obviously we all have different capacities or whatever, so I'm not really saying much, but I'm saying, like, I think that's a very good way for citizens to start, sit with themselves and understand their privilege as American citizens, and just fall back for a second and just think, what is going on in this country, what is going on within people who are living around me, amongst me, who are my classmates, who are my friends, who are my partners, who are like my community members, that I am unaware of, and how do I fit here? And when you start
Hmm.
having those questions, you start seeing where the double weaving can come in, where the intersectionality can come in, where your role in the good fight comes in.
Hmm. It sounds like radical empathy to me. It sounds
Yeah,
very much, yeah. Hmm.
yeah, and that's it's it starts with empathy.
Right.
Yeah.
Hmm.
It definitely starts with that. And I think that you bring up a point about capacity, right? And I think that capacity is something that needs to be talked about in in every organizing space, because there's only so much that we can do. The system is so much larger than an individual. So that individual needs to take care of themselves. But I think that my point in saying that was that you need to, one, empathize, and then two, at least amplify,
Hmm.
right? And I think that that's something that we should all hold ourselves accountable to. I think about other movements that my friends are in, and whether it's in the Middle East or whether it's India or Africa. And especially when we talk about immigration, because in the I'll never forget the quote that Dr. Angela Davis says, and she believes that the problem of the 21st century is the problem of immigration, and not just in the United States, but not in Europe, but in Africa,
Across
in
the world.
across the world, everywhere. And so what I think about, it's just, there's so much that we can do, but the bare minimum that we should be beginning to at least act on is amplifying those who are doing the work, those who are experiencing the limitations and restrictions of these laws, and the hate that goes on to this world, and show radical empathy and at least radical solidarity, that I see
Hmm.
you, I hear you, and we're in the struggle together.
I completely agree. And I do want to circle back on something because I'm trying to think of how to phrase it. But before we started recording, we were talking about one of the challenges in this specific space as it comes to undocumented peoples in the United States is the voices that need to speak up and the faces that we maybe don't see. And I'd love to hear if you guys have any thoughts on that, just in terms, because I do feel like you guys are very important voices in this space. You guys have been featured on the New York Times and Telemundo and Univision and NPR. Did I make that last one up? I
No,
apologize.
NPR,
Okay. Yeah.
The White House.
the White House,
Yeah, of course.
Georgetown University. No, I think you bring up a great point, and that's the way that the immigration movement has not seen a path reform or a pathway to citizenship in the last 40 years. Within the last 40 years, a lot of things have occurred, and I think about to like with you saying this, I think a lot about the COVID-19 pandemic. And I think a lot about how me and Shayla grew up in Teaneck, New Jersey, 10 minutes outside Manhattan. And our town was one of
The
the
epicenter.
epicenter of COVID-19 during 2020, March of 2020. And I saw a lot of community members pass away, a lot. And it was a very personal issue that occurred in my family as well. But something that happened through the pandemic, through 2020, is that Shayla and I saw no immigrant voices being centered when immigrants were the ones who were working the groceries, who were working all the jobs, the essential jobs, who were working at the hospitals, who were cleaning the hospitals, who were cleaning after the doctors, who were taking care of like the patients, nurses.
The DACA recipients as well.
DACA recipients are nurses, are caretakers, are all of these essential people who helped us push through that really difficult time. And there was not a single highlight to the fact that we community members were dying and that a lot of undocumented people were dying and we couldn't return back to our country. That experience brings up so much more pain than I can ever really describe in a conversation right now.
Yeah,
But
of course.
something that Shayla and I did is that we were losing our minds. We were losing our minds, and we said we have to go and we have to do something and we have to advocate. In the same way that a lot of racialized communities and low-income communities were disproportionately harmed by COVID-19, but
Native
where
American.
Native Americans, just every type of racialized group had their own experience, but people were ignoring the fact that citizenship was affecting in a drastic way where people who had not returned home in 20 years died in the US stateless, without status, without a pathway to citizenship, and they were essential workers and they never saw justice.
They never saw healthcare either.
They never saw healthcare. And so what Shayla and I did, and Teen Vogue published a piece on the advocacy work that we did during 2020, was that we were the leading faces of being like, hey, my community members are suffering. Something really terrible happened to our family, and we're speaking up about it
because
this
we're
is
human
unjust.
beings.
We're human beings living through this. And that's the way that I think the American government has been so fortunate that they silence undocumented immigrants. And how could I think
Invisibilized.
they are invisibilized. And I think that I as a DACA recipient currently, I have the privilege of being protected away from deportation, but even that the program is on the brink of like, I don't know, not like dying. So who knows? But within that program, Shayla and I had been given the voice, to the power to feel empowered enough to go out into the streets and say, I'm a member of the undocumented community and I'm going to call it out for what it is. There are not many voices who are allowed to say that. And every day, the number of DACA recipients are shrinking little by little. We started off with 800,000 DACA recipients in 2017. And I don't know, I don't have the
We
perfect
have
number.
600 now.
We have 600,000 DACA recipients now. And
Yeah, so it's interesting too when the White House or President Biden or all these people in office talk about this program, when it's just like, if we're being honest about it, like 600,000 people. So a lot of people don't renew because they're incapable of paying the renewal fee that is $500. Like my sister and I have both struggled to pay our DACA renewals like
Yeah.
multiple times.
that comes out like that comes randomly every 2 years,
Yeah,
and you
so
have to be
we
prepared for it.
so we know how hard and difficult it is to even just do that. But it's interesting though because it's a double-edged sword, really. And it's like the sword is one, DACA was never enough, right? And
Hmm.
it that's one thing that a lot of us feel, and it's because one, it's the no pathway to citizenship. Two, it just protecting a small fraction of our community. And two, it's dying. So it's like, how do you say that it's not enough while it's also just being like also taken away? So at the same time, it's a very, very huge privilege. But the reality is that elected officials want to act like the program is something so much more than what it really is.
Mhm.
And it's not. It's interesting as to what will happen in the next couple of years to the future of DACA, because the only thing that we can continue to say is that we need a citizenship, we need a pathway to citizenship, and that means that
Hmm.
Congress needs
Needs
to
to act.
act. And as silly as you might think, or as some people might think that it is to even say these words when they haven't even shown us proof that they care about us in the past 40 years, it is still worth demanding. It is still worth fighting for because we need it. People
Hmm.
need it.
Hmm.
Um, yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. I forget. Oh my God, I forget who co-sponsored the bills. It, the closest we came was when Obama was still president, or am I wrong? With McCain and Marco Rubio, am I wrong about that? I feel like there was a moment when bipartisan support was almost there, and then it died out. And I think that's like such a tragedy to me because it's such an ongoing issue that, can I speak candidly? Is that okay with everyone?
Yeah.
I am very concerned about the lack of movement on the Biden admin's part on this issue because I feel, how can I say this delicately? My concern is
Go
that
for it.
the previous inaction of this issue directly led to Trump. And I feel like it's a direct line to the Trump presidency, and that Biden ignoring it again is going to lead to something similar, if not worse. That's my
Yeah.
concern. And
Well, yeah.
yeah.
And so what I want to say to that, right? It's like, and I've said this in meetings with elected officials before, and I think about how the Democratic Party really wants to use Donald Trump as a scapegoat for the mess that the immigration movement is right now, and just the policy issue in general. And it's obvious that Donald Trump definitely set the movement back. It totally did. But
Of
also
course.
we have to talk about President Obama, and we have to talk about the anti-immigration laws that were already taking place, right? And so I think that what now you see is happening is that the Biden administration and the Democratic Party overall just saw, it's like, okay, immigration is not at the top of their list in priorities. They already have seen people get away with anti-immigration rhetoric, and they already know that no one is going to impose, no one's going to bring it up as a problem to them. I think that they truly think that they can get away with it, is the reality. And that's what really scares me. That's what scares me. And I really think that the radical paradigm shift that many of us have been talking about, Bernie Sanders has been talking about this, AOC has been talking about this, and we've been talking about this. I think that it's inevitable. And I think that I don't know if there will be a candidate who will make it a priority.
I think you bring up a really good point, both of you. I think that when we look at just American politics overall, there has never at least within my current existing time period, I have never seen the the call to action and the empathy and just like understanding the fact that undocumented immigrants are human beings living in the United States and whose humanity and also further contribution to this country is worth acknowledging. And that's how they get away with exploitation. That's how they get away with the exploitation on our bodies, on our mental health, on our
Mhm.
physical health, on our entire existence. I think a lot about what I said recently, and I am 23 years old. And this is just to share my story because my story deserves to be shared as well as every undocumented immigrant living in this country without a promising future of ever obtaining citizenship right now. And that's how I feel myself. And I look at it and I'm 23 years old. I came to this country in 2004. Next year it will be 20 years that I've been living in this country, and I still don't see a pathway to citizenship. And people can feel a lot of ways about it. People can think whatever they want to say, but I know what I am, and I know that I'm American. I am indigenous, and because of sovereignty and borders, and because of politics, the land that was mine has been taken and has been colonized and has been established in the way that they can dictate when I will ever be recognized on my own land of Turtle Island. And that to me
Mhm.
is mind-boggling. But all of these people in office get away with it. They get away with it, and they go to sleep at night and don't think about the fact that anyone will ever call on their exploitation and what it currently could look like. And
Yeah.
oh,
And so I think that to add on to your point, because this is what truly is the root of citizenship, it comes down to race. It comes down to race. And I think a lot about so I worked under Professor Donna Brazil, who was the DNC, the chair of the DNC, and she wrote a paper, not a paper, she wrote for the Grigio, and she talked about undocumented Black people, and she talked
mhm,
about how immigration is a Black issue. And she told me that she was very inspired by Melanie and I to write this paper. And that to me was kind of showed me like, wow, like if people really take a moment, think about it, really analyze the issue, like they can see that one, we're not asking for anything crazy. We are actually like human beings and we do deserve rights. And so that was one proof that a little bit of research can make you feel that way. And two, also just that it comes back down to race. And I think a lot about what you're saying about exploitation and at what's happening at the border. And you could say this for literally any country, any nation right now, especially colonized nations, right? You see that the people who are mostly affected by these borders and the violence that goes on at these borders are indigenous people and Black people.
mhm.
And if you studied the history of citizenship in the United States, you understand that, Native Americans didn't get citizenship till like way after. You know, Black Americans didn't get citizenship till way after as well. And so you understand that this is super tied to labor. And
Mhm.
what we're seeing right now is that one, it really sucks every single time that we talk about immigrants and we focus on labor, but it's something that needs to be talked about because I'm not saying that our lives are worthy because of the labor that we do. I'm saying that the labor that we do is the precise reason why these people are invalidating our existence and our humanity. And we truly see it, whether like just going down the street in Washington D.C., all these apartment buildings that are getting built. Who do you think is
Just building
building
it.
them?
Mhm.
Who do you think is risking their lives every single day? So it goes back down to it. Citizenship is tied to race. Citizenship is works differently for indigenous and Black
But
people. And it comes back down to the question that I always say, and it's like at the end of the day, we need to build a democracy that
yes,
nurtures and loves and cares
we
Black
need
and indigenous people.
we need a radical democracy,
A radical
Like
democracy.
Mhm.
Angela Davis would say. But no, I want to emphasize on your point. It's been a week and I have not seen President Biden say a single thing about DACA. Maybe I'm not looking at the news, but I'm not seeing
The
it. I'm not
the
seeing his
the
response.
press secretary gave a statement. And, it's the statement. When I talked to President Biden, he told me, we're going to protect DACA. We're going to make sure that you're protected. And he said this to me. And I said, thank you. But, all undocumented immigrants matter. Like, my parents matter.
I think that I was reading a statement from the President's Alliance on Higher Education and Immigration, and I want to read out a quote right now because I think that this was something really close to what I've been thinking. And the quote says, "The ultimate way forward for dreamers with and without DACA and the country as a whole remains Congress delivering on the wishes of the strong majority of the American public and enacting an accessible pathway to citizenship for all." Yes, it's a call to action 2 decades in the making, and one that seems almost rote to emphasize given the history of the issue. But we must continue to empathize that reality. Meanwhile, state policymakers should continue to build on the recent policy successes in states such as Maryland and Massachusetts, and advance licenses, tuition equity, and other policies that empower dreamers to study, to work, and participate more fully in their states, while we call on Congress to do its job and to resolve this issue. And I think about that statement a lot because it said a lot of things. The number one thing is, Congress is a tricky Pandora box that we can even like go on to open, right? But it's incredibly telling, and I wish more liberals and I wish more Democrats would sit with the fact that President Biden does not care about immigration. He does not care, and it's crazy when you like when people who are not well aware of this issue don't know what the stance on is. But like as a person sitting here, there's absolutely no, not a doubt within my mind that this issue is going under the rug, is beneficial for all American politicians who are complacent with the current situation and reality that we live in, and it's extremely disturbing when you understand the way that American politics works and why this is the agenda that is ongoing. But I think that I want to emphasize on how much state politics matters. I want to
Mhm.
emphasize on the individual collective power that we can build across states and across some legislators who do care. And hopefully, like, we need to build a movement where immigration comes up on the top of the top most pressing issues of the next president of you know
Yeah. And I agree, and this is why I agree. It's because of the seekers. Like
Mhm.
this is what it comes down to. Because if we're being honest, right? I think that the rules that ICE and immigration use for asylum, it's a very hard process, right? And it varies for different nations and countries on how easy it is to get asylum granted. And especially when you come from Central America or Mexico, it's so much more harder. And I think about the truth of the matter is undocumented immigrants come to this country because they need asylum. you know People think that the reason for migrating because of economic issues isn't a valid issue,
Mhm.
because whatever's happening in your country, that's your country's fault, and that's the consequence that you need to live through. And it's messed up, because the truth of the matter is, why do you think our home countries are so destabilized? Why do you think that we're escaping from poverty? I think about every single issue in the world that we all face, and I come back down to poverty.
Mhm.
Martin Luther King, he came down to poverty.
Yeah.
That's blasphemy, if we're truly talking about our world and our existence. Poverty. No human being should be living that way. And so when I think about the climate crisis, people are going to be
Mhm.
seeking asylum for so many different reasons all over the world. People from all over the world. We're talking about Libya right now,
Yeah.
and the amount of floods, and it's like these people, they might need to seek asylum, right? And each reason why all these people are seeking asylum, all of them are valid. We are all looking for a sanctuary, right? And now we're at a point where the United States isn't a sanctuary in the ways that we think that it might be, right? But I think
Mhm.
that there's a truth that needs to be, that remains, and it's just the value of the American citizenship carries a sanctuary, and just being in America carries some sort of sanctuary in
In comparison
comparison
to the
to
world.
other nations.
Mhm.
And so my point is, all undocumented immigrants are seeking asylum. Our families come here for a better life because we're seeking asylum. And that's the bigger issue. It's people, nations.
I want to go back to something you said about immigration as a Black and Indigenous issue because, right, I'll be upfront. I have privilege. I'm a citizen in this country. I'm not Indigenous. I'm just like some mestizo dude. And I feel like that has always been a gripe of mine of like the mestizo identity is how the conversations are framed. And it's like, oh, they don't like us. They don't care about us. And it's not just mestizos. It's also a lot of like white Latino people. And I'm like, respectfully, this is not about us. A lot of the violence, especially if you look back to what happened in 2018 with family separation,
Yeah.
I was very upset about how the dialogue ended up being framed, where a lot of, respectfully, like Mexican mestizo people would be like, "Oh, they're doing this to us," and I'm like, a lot of those people are indigenous and from Central America. Like, it is
Yes.
not only a Mexican issue. And now you can continue to see the harm being done with people from Haiti, with people from Venezuela, with people from Cuba. Like, this is ongoing, but the conversation is being framed in this really whack way. And I don't know if you guys have any thoughts on that that you'd like to expound on.
I do, and I think that you bring up a great point about child family separation. I studied philosophy and government at Georgetown, and one of the papers that was the most meaningful to me was breaking down the evilness in terms of morality with the immigration policies that separated families. And if you look at those records to this day, I don't want to mess up my numbers, but I think it was around like over 2,500 children were separated under Trump's administration. And I wrote this paper last year in December, so I did it in the fall semester of 2022, and I was looking at Biden's efforts to relocate these families and reconnect them again. And I think at that point he had only done so for 500 kids. And I had to do a lot of research, and you think and you think and you think about it, and you read all the reports that are coming out, and it's indigenous people from Guatemala, from El Salvador, from Central America, and indigenous Mexicans
Mhm.
who primarily are being separated at the border, who are being lost at the border, who are dying at the border. I saw a report that was saying that, oh, the US and Mexican border is now the deadliest like point of like border throughout the entire world right now. And it's like these are indigenous migrants who are dying, and people don't care. And people don't care that there are little indigenous children being separated from their parents. And we like, what is happening to the rest of the 2,000 children who have not been like reconnected with their parents? Like, that is lives, destinies that are being impacted and changed forever for the
Mhm.
foreseeable future for these people. And and no one cares because they are Black and or indigenous, and
And that they don't speak
and
English
they don't speak
sometimes.
English, or they don't speak
Speak
Spanish.
Spanish. Yeah.
They're
Mhm.
speaking their own indigenous language in these borders, and people are desensitized to their pain and their suffering and their realities, and it's sick and it's disgusting and it's inhumane, and it needs to be talked about. So when you bring that up, it's like that is how you see the layer of violence going on the border and through citizenship.
It's like,
And through racialization and colonialism and language
yeah,
accessibility. It
Mhm.
is and they get away with
but
so much of it because these are people who through colonial lenses are primitive and
quote unquote.
quote unquote. And
Well, my thing is like, I hope the listeners can differentiate our voices. But just one thing that I always say is that there are layers to settler colonialism.
mhm,
And these layers are sometimes you don't even have the language to identify them. But I feel like within these past years, I've been really lucky to and grateful to be able to name my experiences. But the truth is that there's layers and components to it, and I think about it, and I think that that's why the government continues to get away with it,
mhm,
because these layers are invisible, but they're palpable. You know, you live
Mhm.
through them. And I think about the undocumented experience as a native person. You know, I was born in Oaxaca. My family is
Comes from
still in
Pueblo.
Oaxaca. Shout out to my pueblo, Santa Catarina, yo sono tú. But I say this though because it's so wild when you think about colonization and settler colonialism, and we are talking about Turtle Island, and we're talking about the fact that I, as an undocumented indigenous woman, can't move. I can't travel. Like, traveling is such a human right. Just migrating and seeing the world the way that we were supposed to see the world. I think about my friends who don't need to even like get their visas to travel because like American citizenship just allows you to like float through the world like no matter what, right?
Mhm.
And it's just little things like that about the undocumented experience that is so specific to us, but even more so when you're an undocumented
I mean,
Black or Indigenous person.
I mean, I think this is all very, very important because we're talking about migration and movement, right? We're talking about movement. And something that keeps coming up to mind and something that needs to be held space for is, I don't know if you remember, I don't really remember when this happened, but it was, I think last summer. I think it was last summer when around 40 migrants died in on the border, crossing into the border, and they were in a trailer.
Mhm.
And they died of over like the heat.
Exposure, overheat. Mhm.
Yeah. And these were babies, these were women, these were young people, these were 17-year-olds. These were just people's souls, And as a undocumented woman who crossed the border, I have to sit with that pain and read that story. And that is the most heartbreaking thing that people don't understand. That movement, that borders, that the out of necessity, this is what we are willing to do. We are willing to put ourselves in dangerous situations that have been designed by the border, by the government. And we do so either ways because of
We're fighting for
necessity,
our
and we are fighting for
lives.
our lives. And I think that citizens read that and don't even care. They can go about their day. But for me, that opened up nightmares. That opened up a sense of like grief that you cannot even begin to grapple with for more than 5 minutes, because you will lose your mind as an undocumented being, seeing how easily that could have been you, or how that could have been a community member who just arrived a couple of weeks ago. And I think that people are desensitized because these are Black and brown bodies, because these are
Mhm.
indigenous people, because these are people who through white supremacy's lives have been just subjugated historically, and people are okay with it. But that is the type of gravity of harm that citizenship and borders are inflicting in today's world, and people need to wake the fuck up and say, this is not right, and why is this being supported, why is this allowed, and why are we desensitized? And that story needs to be talked about, because it's so evil in so many capacities, and
Mm.
its violence, and its lives.
Yeah. I can't even begin to. I mean, words don't do it justice how much I agree with you, honestly. I mean, that was specifically that moment. I don't even know how to phrase it, and I might like cut this out, but it was just such like a radicalizing yet cynical moment for me, because when that happened and I saw how little people cared, I mean, it's maddening. There's no other way to say it. And it's even between us, like we have a different experience just because of that fucking line, right? And that citizenship. But it's still like, I don't know how people can live with themselves, like to just see it happen and not care. I mean, that's something I don't know. I mean, that's something that like the people after us are going to judge us very harshly for. And
Absolutely.
there's, yeah,
Absolutely. And
I
and
say
and
this all the
and
time.
and it's crazy because I think a lot about that day and that weekend and that whole week and time period of processing that. I remember, and this can get very intimate, but I'll share it. It was
you don't
me and
have
my
to if you don't want to. Also, like
it
okay,
has to be voiced, but me, my mom, and my dad and my brother, we were like in the car, I think, and it was like a family day, and like none of us really wanted to bring it up because no one wanted to really talk about it with each other, because when you start talking about these open wounds, oof, it's a cascade of just emotions and grief and a lot of things that can't be put into words. But we just all looked at each other and we cried 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 and we mourned for these people who we didn't know, because we know who they are and we know what kind of stories and pains and similarities that we share, and we know what was at stake for them, and we know what dream they had. We know what American promise has been given, has been like branded out through the whole world, and how you have illusions. You have illusions of bringing a better life for yourself, for your family, for survival, and you risk it all, and you endure the horrible like circumstances, and that's what could happen, and no one blinks. And I just remember my whole family crying about it, and I think that was just, it's like you said, it's a very radicalizing moment, but it's also incredibly pessimistic, because you are looking at a lot of death, and you're looking at a lot of sadness. And to me, I just wish that more people could just sit with themselves and read that and be like, this is going on the border of my country, and what can I do, and how should I care, and what can I do, you know?
Yeah. Mhm. I want to pivot towards something a little more towards community organizing, but I do want to say, yeah, for a country with a lot of sins, I mean, it felt like a cardinal one, like and it's just so recent. And I wish we did a better job of grieving collectively, like for that moment and for what happened in 2020, where a lot of us, I feel like, don't talk about it. Like that was, and it's like, it's going to affect us in the future. And it's just, you can't really see what that means yet. You know what I mean? And this is just coming from like, I'm 24, you guys are 23. Like, it's hard to see how we fully process those years and what's still happening now. I wanted to talk about community organizing though, and I want to talk about praxis, because going back to the faceless conversation and the giving voice to the voiceless, this is kind of headier. I don't know if you guys even want to talk about this, but I'm really curious. Like the past, what, 10, 12 years have seen a big rise in organizations that involve mass mobilization, maybe without a figurehead, right? And I'm thinking about BLM. I'm thinking about the Arab Spring. I'm wondering, do you see a future in that, or do you see the usefulness in a figurehead? Like, I'd love to just get your thoughts on that.
I think that one of the most important lessons that any organizer with a good heart needs to learn and comes to learn is that there's no one face to a movement, right? Like we can't do this alone. Like no matter how much like we try to at least like speak up, we can't do it alone. So I think that organizing and speaking to one another across different identities needs to occur. I always emphasize on the need for international solidarity, and I think that that's the most radical thing that we can do, truly. Care about other nations, care about our brothers and sisters who live across the world from us and feel their pain. And hope, and vice versa, because that's what we need. That's what we need. I think that we are all flawed. I think that we always have so much more space to learn from one another. And I think that the only way we can do it is horizontal dialogue, is what I think of it as. I think that if I have like this picture in my head with like the world and everyone holding hands across the world or whatever, right? But the truth of the matter is that there's experiences that our neighbors go through that we will never understand. People who grow up in war live a whole different reality than the people who live in a country like the United States, who have never had the war right in front of our eyes. So things like that. But I remember there was we were discussing this in one of my critical race theory classes that I took at Georgetown. And we were asking the question, is it really possible to have international solidarity? And should we even be embracing it and looking towards it? And I was just so shocked that we were debating this, because the obvious answer is yes. Like we need it. There is no way, right? And I keep coming back to the climate crisis because it just gives us so many answers that we all need to look towards for anyone interested in any type of policy. The climate crisis is there, right? And just makes me think like in a couple of years, we don't know where we're gonna be land wise,
Yeah.
ocean wise. We don't know where we're gonna be food wise. And so what I'm saying is that at the end of the day, we need to look beyond citizenship status, and that means the need to look beyond nations and forming solidarity, and creating movements that really one embrace the difference of one another and not looking to make, dare to create a perfect nation. No, we need to understand that perfection doesn't really exist, but to strive to be a little bit more justice and community oriented.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Eh,
I don't think that
It's,
answered that question.
I think it did. I'll accept it. Thank you for checking
Yeah.
in on this. I do think it's like that's the thing with the climate crisis, right? Is it's like it really does feel like it just ruins that liberal conservative dynamic. Like it doesn't make sense. Like you can't like, oh, debate what we're gonna like it's gonna come no matter what. Like you know what I mean? It's like we're staring
Yeah.
down the barrel of the Anthropocene, like it's here. Like we can't really have this debate anymore. And it's like it's mind-boggling that we still are. Yeah, I get you 100%, and I agree. And it's like all these struggles are so interconnected, like
Same.
this struggle and the Palestinian struggle and the struggle of migrants in Europe. It's all connected because we're all being affected by the same things right now.
All
Sorry, I
connected.
don't yeah.
No, and so I had the privilege to meet Dr. Angela Davis this year when she came to Georgetown. So shout out to the organizers who organized that, but she surprised the shit out of me with her presentation, what
I
she
think a
had
lot
to
of
say.
people.
She came and she spoke about the connectedness of Palestine and Ferguson, right?
Hmm.
And she also made the point to once again talk about undocumented people. She made the point to think beyond borders. And that's what it is, because in reality, when we think about the climate crisis, a tsunami isn't going to stop at a border. Like a tornado, like a hurricane isn't going to stop, and it's just evident that we were never supposed to live this way.
Yeah.
Sorry.
It's similar to like the COVID-19 pandemic. Like, yo, we went through a pandemic, a really, really bad one that we haven't even begun to process the effects of. But it was traveling all over the world, And I think that to me, it was a good example to show a lot of people how an issue is plaguing the whole world. And it's like, what is it here right now? It's white supremacy, it's imperialism, it's neocolonialism, it's patriarchy, it's racism, it's classism, it's elitism, it's just all the hierarchical structures of taxonomies that just have been implemented in this world that is the issue, and that is affecting all of us, and that solidarity is real. I think one thing that Dr. Angela Davis also said that was really interesting to me, and it's like she said she harvests knowledge and she shares that knowledge with the world through her books. But the way that she harvests knowledge is by listening to the people who have it, who are suffering so much, and that she doesn't relate to that suffering, and that she doesn't know about that suffering. And she said
Mhm.
something that, and I don't want to put the words into precise because I
She talks about
don't
poor
remember
people
that. But she was like, I hang out with poor people, and I
or
find
women.
a poor women, and I find out the struggles of these poor women, and then they share their pain with me, and I can conceptualize it, and then I can talk about it, and then I can write it in my book, and then I can create theory about it. And I was just like, I felt so seen because Shayla and I are immigration activists who have been working for the past 18 years. In 2017, when Donald Trump rescinded DACA, that
We were
very
outside the
first
Trump
day,
Tower.
we went outside the Trump Tower, and we said to the entire world, hey, we're undocumented, we're 17 years old, and this is what we believe in, and this is who we are fighting for.
That's when we
And
came out of the shadows.
yeah,
That was the
yeah.
first time we ever talked about our
And
status.
it's crazy because any year before 2017, no one knew. I went my whole life with my best friends, and my best friends did not know that I was undocumented. My teachers did not know. Not a single person outside of my home knew that I was undocumented. And that comes with a lot of shame of how you're growing up. But now that in
Criminalization.
criminalization and dehumanization and all these things, but now as a 23-year-old with a consciousness and with a degree, I can understand exactly what that girl was going through, and I can understand my reality now. And it's scary, and things are at stake, and I'm not protected, but it's worth sharing your experience so that more people can see I'm not going through that. And if there are people who find wrong with that as well, they themselves can come to that understanding that, like Dr. Angela Davis, and she's talking about undocumented people. She said it's the issue of the 21st century that will only be exacerbated. And to me, seeing people with that radical empathy is beautiful. It's a beautiful thing, and it gives me hope. And I know that there are a lot of people out existing who can share and display that in this world.
Yeah. And I think in you made a point that made me think about to one of your previous questions. And so I think that the moment when I met Angela Davis and I talked to her about college access for non-citizens actually, and she was like, "You're doing it, you're doing the work, continue." And it was, yo, like I'm telling you, like one of the best moments of my life. Like Angela Davis was talking about undocumented people and saw me. Like I swear in that moment I felt like
You didn't
it
have
was
to
a
fight.
divine moment. It was such a divine moment where I felt like she was talking to me. She was telling me, "Hey, you're not crazy. You're actually onto something.
You're not
So
asking for too
you're not
much.
asking for too much. Not only are you not asking for too much, but you're ahead of your time."
Mhm.
And that's what it is like to be undocumented
Mhm.
because you understand that our humanity is universal. You understand that borders are not fucking real and shouldn't be dictating the quality of life that you have. And so back to your question about what do you think about organizing and movement and if someone should just, I just go back down to grassroots activism is super sacred and it needs to be
Value.
amplified and valued, right? And I see a lot of like activists these days, especially Gen Z. I think that so many of my friends, so many college students are activists. And I think that it's a beautiful thing because we come to realize that we need one another. Everyone needs to be doing this work. We all need to be firefighters. Like philosopher Olufemi Taiwo says, we all need to be firefighters as the world is burning. But it comes back down to the people who are doing the most radical work, the people who are or who are doing getting at the root of the problem is grassroots activists who are tied to their communities, who are tied to the people who are suffering. And I think that that's why the work that we do at CAN is so sacred to me and so special to me because these are kids who like are from my communities. Like
Mhm.
these are like, the way son nuestros paisanos. Like that's the way that I say it because that's how grassroots it is. And it's like we have the ability to change and alter their futures in
Yeah.
just little ways,
Mhm.
man. Like just someone telling you that you can do this, just met through mentorship and encouragement and empowerment. We have the ability to change their futures in a way and also create change makers. And so my point of this is though, it's that it's time to center the activists who are poor. It's time
Mhm.
to center the activists who are undocumented. It's time to center the activist that is queer and doesn't fit in anywhere. It's time to literally center the people at the fucking margins, the
Mhm.
people whose voices
Mhm.
aren't ever recognized, the ones who don't get time 100. I don't know.
No, I think you make a lot of good points. And I want to say two things really quick. I was an intern for the National Domestic Workers Alliance for about a year and a half. And it was a wonderful experience that only furthered my experience and my knowledge and in organizing spaces. But these women, the National Domestic Workers Alliance, in the chapter of DC are primarily Black and Brown women, a lot of Central American women, and a lot of immigrant women, and a lot of survivors of gendered violence as well.
Mhm.
On something that I saw that was so amazing through my time was that these women who are 45 years old, 50 years old, women like my mother, women who are domestic workers, women who clean houses, women who are the backbone of literally everything, go to work, go and clean 3 houses a week, and then they were there every single day, like, when they needed to be, organizing, coming to me with action days, coming to do protests, testifying in front of the DC council with me, like, sharing their stories, and these are women who, like, speak Spanish and don't speak English, and these are women who I had to work with and, like, prepare their stories and learn from, and that takeaway was the most beautiful and humbling experience of my life because as an activist who speaks English, who is young right now, just seeing how the people at the most of the margins have so much power, so much consciousness, so much knowledge. Like people want to strip that away from the very people who are suffering. Let me put it back into the conversation that these people can defend themselves and are doing it, and those are the activists that need to be supported. So to me it was a beginning of justice when I helped pass the DC Domestic Workers Bill of Rights that came into law in December 18 of 2022. That was a bill that these women of the district had been working for years, 2-3 years, to get passed into law. And guess what, their own labor, after clocking out of cleaning some rich white woman's homes, they were coming back. Sorry, I just choked. Yeah, it's so unfortunate. Damn, I was going so strong. But these women have themselves more rights for themselves. And these are literally black and brown women who have raised me and women who have taught me. And I think that to me, it's like those are the organizers doing it. Like those are the people doing it, and those are the people that need to be supported, and those are the people that need to be given the support. And so I say that, but to another point of Shayla's point of who we help at College Access for Non-Citizens, I think I could take this moment right now to reflect and be like, wow, Shayla and I have come a very long way from the people from the little girls that we used to be back in 2017. You know, Shayla and I fought very hard for an education. We went to community college. We were undocumented. We paid tuition out of our own pocket.
Work three
I
jobs
worked 3
each.
jobs each to pay and make way through community college, and by the grace of God and by my freaking labor, I got myself into Georgetown University, and now with a full ride, and now I'm debt free, and I am commencing my life, and that wouldn't have been possible had it not been for the little conversations that I had with other people who had come before me and who have shown me, hey, this is possible and you can do it too. And so at CAN, it's such a privilege to be able to help the brown kids who are getting told no every day. The brown kids who are getting told, hey, maybe you should maybe college isn't for you. Maybe you should go and go work or go to a technical school, and there's completely nothing wrong with that. But the way that you are limiting barriers from social mobility, from or taking the way of the empowerment for these kids to have these dreams, that is violence and stagnation, and that is preventing economic and racialized mobility. So to me, the work that we are being done
And it's so
is
personal.
it's personal, and it has the power to change one life for the better. Like, for example, there's this kid, one of my mentees who I help out. He was telling me like, "Oh, I wasn't even gonna go to college at all." And to now he's like on his first semester at community college, and one of his dreams is to transfer to like Princeton University or Columbia or all these other schools. And I know that he can do it because hey, I did it. I went to community college. I have all these barriers like that try to stop me, but there are some way somehow, maybe by the grace of God, maybe sheer luck, whatever people want to believe in, but it's possible and dreams can come true. And he looks at me now and he's like, one of my biggest dreams is to go to Harvard Law. And you're the only person who I know that is going to go to Harvard Law. And I'm just like, that's really crazy. Like having that experience is everything to a lot of people because it was everything to me. And it is some of the things
Yeah.
that I owe to the people who have helped me in my journey. And that's doing the work for the love of your community.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. I'm so observing all that. I had one last question, and I think it ties in directly to that. I'm trying to think of how to phrase it right now. I don't know how to say this in a way. I guess because I wouldn't say we're not radical.
Radical is just tackling things at its root. Like, we're just seeing it for what it is. We put the puzzle pieces together that the government doesn't want us to puzzle
Put together. Yeah.
together, you know?
I guess what I'm trying to say is I feel like hmm, a big criticism of elite institutions like Georgetown, like Princeton, right, is that, and even government structures, Congress, the White House, you can't tear down the master's house with the master's tools. I have to acknowledge how much good you can do when given access to these tools, when you give access to voices like yourselves and your community and the people that you help out. So I want to just get your thoughts on the importance of access to university, to law school, especially in the face of everything we just talked about.
I want to answer this because I have a quote from W.E.B. Du Bois that can start me off with just this train of thought because it's something that we all
We
reckon
talk
with.
about it
You
all the
know,
time.
you have to. It's a part of the process. But W.E.B. Du Bois says, for education among all kinds of men, for education among all kinds of men always has had and always will have an element of danger and revolution, of dissatisfaction and discontent. Nevertheless, men strive to know. And I think that I am incredibly grateful for my education, for the tools that I have today to be able to redesign and reimagine a world that I want to live in. And it's a complex question, but we
Yeah.
live in a world where these structures are ruling right now.
Yeah. Are you Well, I love this question, and I think it's no coincidence that you ask it because I think it's a common debate that any organizer, any decolonial theorist, any anti, like anyone talking about reparations, slavery, colonialism. These are the two in genocide. These are the pillars that, have brought the world to be what it is today. Like literally, damn, the transatlantic slavery, like what if it had never happened? Like, like it has these consequences to every single nation in the world. But I think a lot about this question because we often debate it in critical race theory classes all the time. It comes up all the time. And I think that this is where, I don't know, I think a lot of people think that my politics lean on the left. And I would disagree because I honestly don't see myself as a leftist. I don't see myself as anyone on the right. I'm not saying that I'm in the middle either. I'm simply saying that it's time that we view the world in a different way, in a holistic way, in a way that just centers love. My politics is love. That's what my politics is. And so when I think about it, and I said this to a friend who I was having a conversation with, and it's like, there's so much hopelessness in this world. There's no doubt about it. There's no easy answers. There's no doubt about it. Nobody in this world has the answers to liberation the way that we think that we do. I think that indigenous sovereignty and Black liberation are great steps that, will lead us to healing the wounds of generational trauma that our ancestors have faced. But I think that when we think beyond, we don't know, we don't have the answers. But there's one thing that remains constant, and it's what Du Bois himself has said. And it says that education will always, always be a pillar and a key to liberation. I'm not saying that well-educated people aren't bigots because we have proof that they are, they're
They're around
and
us
it's
all the
everywhere.
time.
But I'm saying that education is a fundamental necessity for us to become liberated. And I think that this is why I am so passionate about education equity, because I know what it feels like to know that to think that I might not go to college.
Mhm.
I know what it feels like to not only just have my creative talent limited, to have my epistemologies limited. I know what that
Good
feels like.
question.
And so I know the power of education. And I know as an undocumented woman, I am very empowered today because of my education. But I also come from a family who has taught me that education isn't just everything, you know? The work that we do with our hands, the work that we feel intrinsically, you know, people who
The
just
knowledge that is just
yeah.
passed down by
So I'm not
birth.
saying that going to college is gonna free us. That's not what I'm
It's more
saying.
so about raising consciousness.
But it's about raising consciousness, and it's about giving people those tools that everybody else in this world all are given, you know, all
and have, have
and
the right to.
have the right to, you know, in college. I think at least for students at Georgetown, you can kind of see what their education means to people, right? And I'm not going to speak for people's experiences, but it's evident when people aren't appreciative of their privilege to be a college student. But every single time I walked on campus, you know, I walked on a campus that was literally built by our ancestors and where people have died and lost lives. But I also walk knowing that I'm an Indigenous woman reclaiming an education, reclaiming and not just taking up space, because I feel like lately I've been like, what the fuck is taking up space? Like, I'm like, nah, like, this is my land. Like,
But there's power being an Indigenous woman sitting in a classroom inside White Gravener. White Gravener named after one of the Jesuits who was responsible for conversion of Indigenous children into like Catholicism and boarding schools, like someone who led them like evil. And there's power in that because you are like, for example, Shayla and I are the first people in my family to go out of state for university. A lot of my family was educated in Mexico, but Shayla and I were the first woman to go to a university like Georgetown. And to me, like that,
or first gen.
yeah, we are first gen. And so it's like there's power in granting the tools that exist today that are what is giving a lot of other people the right to go out to rule the world.
And so it comes back down to this to answer your question. And it's why when race-based affirmative action was taken away in the Supreme Court,
White supremacy.
why it sat a lot with me. And it's because it's as simple as this. They don't want students of color, youth. They don't want these kids to know, you know, and we see it with the book bans. We see it with the
Don't say gay.
the anti-trans policies that are being implemented around the country. And it's because of consciousness, and they don't want us to be aware. So I think that, you know, the saying about the tools in the master's house, it's very applicable in many cases, but I think that at the end of the day, there's a reason why they don't want us to have these tools. And education is a tool to liberation. And so while we live in these systems, we are entitled to them, and we will continue to fight for education for students of color and undocumented students.
Yeah. And I think one last example that can be recognized is Georgetown University is the number one school that produces the most congressmen in the United States. That's just like a fact that's out there. Who are these people who are getting admitted into Georgetown? You know, like Georgetown is a PWI in every sense. In every sense. What is their plan for admissions to tackle this problem of race-based affirmative action? I can confidently say those people have no plan, no substantial plan. I'm sure they are looking into the affinity spaces in Georgetown to be able to do the work for them, putting labor on the already like students of color who are already experiencing a very violent experience at a PWI and are exploiting their labor. These institutions don't want us there, and it's for a reason. And it's not to say that I trust every person of color who's going to go on and to do the right thing with these tools that we have, because everyone is different, you know? But the more of us that we can get in there, then perhaps there could be a more collective where we build the world, where we are the ones who are creating policy, where we are the ones who are in the court, where we are the ones running for office, where we are the ones who are getting a spot on there. And I know that a lot of people can try to come at me, but right now my life my life as a DACA recipient will be in the hands of 9 judges right now who have no idea what it's like to be undocumented. And it's like, if we can build a world where one day there is more people in the court who are less pieces of shit, like, maybe a girl can dream that someone like me wouldn't have to be in a position where someone like Brett Kavanaugh is going to be ruling on my fate, you know?
Yeah.
And it's complex, and it gets such a gray area for people, but I'm not afraid to say that I look forward to the day where there are people in those tables who have a better heart.
Yeah. And I think to end off, because we can talk about this all day, but there's this like specific quote in Olufemi Taiwo's book in
Yes, I love this.
the title?
Elite capture, no, reconsidering
I'm
reparations.
reconsidering reparations. And I think it's the beginning of chapter 1 or the introduction. It's one of those two, or it's one of the first couple chapters. And he starts by talking, and he ends the chapter with, "It's time that they met their match." And he's talking about, the government, and he's talking about the oppressors and the white supremacists
And the colonizers
and the
and
colonizers
imperialists and the capitalists.
and folks who enslaved people, right? And so we've talked about multiple things today. We've talked about literally so many policy issues, and we come to the understanding that all of it is interconnected. So it's
And rooted in
essentially
white
it's all one huge problem, right?
rooted off
And
white
it's
supremacy.
and the truth is, like, the world is just on fire. And so what Taiwo says, it's that the issue has always been this big.
Mhm.
The issue has always been this hopeless, right? Quote unquote. The
Or
issue has
has
always
always
been this bad, from, whether it's the 1920s, the 1800s, like in all these eras since the beginning of the birth of this nation. And so what he says is, so it's not necessarily about focusing about just like
because
the doom.
because we
We
focus on
focus
the
on
evil.
we
We focus on the evil, and we focus on the power of these people so much.
And so what he finishes his book by is, it's time that they met their match. And what that means is that every single one of us who, strives to live in a better world, to
Everyone who's
strive
angry.
to see justice and be free. It's time for all us to get fired up and
Because
do the necessary work in the ways that we are able to.
and I go back to this, and I go back to poor people, you know?
Mhm.
I'm sure there are more poor people out there than there is living amongst, living in wealth. That's the
Mhm.
reality. Poverty is an issue that goes back to the beginning
Yeah.
of time. But you create that collective power of solidarity within all of us who are angry, with all of us who are suffering. It's time they met their match. So instead of focusing on the grandeur of the evilness and the amount of times that those people have won, why don't we focus on creating such a big light, like a light of all of our force, and equate ourselves to understand that as
We are
humans,
powerful.
we have power as well, as people who have endured the suffering of all of these issues. We have something that they don't have, and we are so powerful. And I think I see that through a lot of the faith of my dad. This is a man who has lived in the US for around 30 years, and still has a lot of hope to be able to return to his country one day. That man has endured a lot of suffering, but he doesn't give up and he doesn't get pessimistic. And it's people like that whose strength we should look to, and the strength that we ourselves have within ourselves, build onto it and build such a a collective of power and strength that it's time we take it back, you know?
It's time to take it back. Um, and so for all the pessimists out listening, because I'm not
Dawn-
gonna say that I think that I'm very optimistic, but I think I'm also very realistic. So like I understand, and I come back down to it, and it's like, okay, the climate crisis is here, the fossil fuels continue, and at the end of the day, many activists come down to it like, we're all gonna die. The world is like in the
Oh my
world,
gosh.
the earth itself as a planet will reshape and
Continue.
will continue, but it's about the human race, right? And so what I think is that a lot of us focus on results and like what we can see in our lifetime. And that's it's good to be goal oriented. But I think that at the same time it's like in 100 years when I'm no longer here on this earth, I want my spirit to at least know that it tried and that it did the right thing and that it fought for the people that I love. And so I know that at the end of, like I said to end this, my politics is love. I'm not a leftist, I'm not this and that. I'm just a lover. And I wake up every single day tired and jaded just like the next person does. But at the end of the day, it's the love for people that I don't know that keeps me going. It's the love for my family and so on and so on. So I think that any activist out there, it's just like
It's hard.
we don't need to know the answers, but as long as your spirit and your heart is in the right place and you move through that love, then I think that that's all we can ask for. That's all we can
Yeah.
ask for from one another.
Yeah, absolutely. As long as the effort is put in, right? Okay. Where do people find you guys and how can they help in all the missions you're doing? On a tangible, like immediate level, I mean. Sorry.
That's such a good plug-in, shamelessly. I don't care. So you can follow me on Instagram at Melanie Donaji, Donaji. That's my middle name and Mixteco. You can find me on TikTok at a green velvet couch and on Twitter if you guys are still on there. I'm not super active on there. And you can find College Access for Non-Citizens on Instagram at College Access Non-Citizens.
Yeah. And so you can follow me, Sheila, on Instagram at Sheila Cruz with 2 R's. And on Twitter, it's also Shayla G. Cruz. And then on TikTok, I do a lot of TikToks there. So
Sheila's a content creator.
please follow me on TikTok.
We not only are we activists and organizers and a lot of other things, we are also digital creators who are also very into aesthetics, lifestyle, being
And just building community online
yeah.
and making sure that people with identities like ours don't feel alone. So my TikTok is Oaxacan Princess with 3 S's. We'll have it all linked down below for you guys. But yeah, we would love to stay connected and just again, the last thing that we can say is amplify,
Yeah.
donate, share, repost, like, and tell your neighbor
Yeah.
because these are, we live in a digital age, and I think that if we use it for the right reasons, globalization is insane. But and we were never intended to be this connected, but now we are, and the robots are here. Let's use them for
Yes,
good.
so we are very active on College Access for Non-Citizens. That's where we do a lot of our work, a lot of education, informative infographics. So definitely reaches out there. Our website is currently under construction, but it should be out soon. So look at that. We have our link tree on there too, which shows if you ever want to donate anyone. to our funds because the work that we do right now is not it's not for profit, but we would love a lot of support and just to be able to have our projects come into fruition. We do a lot of community building events, workshops, hybrid. So, you can find us there, and we all have our own personal link trees as well, but a lot of cool things are coming, a lot of empowerment, a lot of education, awareness, and raising, because we want to make our issues that we care about accessible to everyone. So the more we build community, the more impact we have on the world.
All those links will be in the notes on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Thank you. You guys are both an inspiration. And thank you for sharing your vision of the future. Really, it means a lot.
Yes.
No,
I
thank
can't
you.
believe you said that.
No, because that's what we
just
do.
yesterday we were hanging out with our friend and we were talking about our dream jobs, and she's like, well, what do you want to do, Shayla? And I was just like, all I want to do is share my vision to the world. Like, that's what I want to do, and that to me is my indigenous futurism. So I can't believe you just said that. Thank you.
Least I could do. Thank you so much. This has been Minority Report with me, your host, Salomón FlamencoOur. You can follow us at Instagram in the podcast notes down below. And if you'd like to continue the conversation, you can email us at minorityreport.beat@gmail.com. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next time.